today's presentation. Our webinar today is on new employee orientation, and it'll be given by Carlene Mitchell, our administrative manager here and in-house HR specialist. This is Cole Cummins, and I'm the loss control manager here at APEI. And before we get started on every webinar we do, we always like to go over the controls of the GoToWebinar system, make sure everyone's familiar with them and how to navigate through it all. In the top right hand of your screen, you should see a little control panel that has an orange arrow. If you click on that orange arrow, it should open up a box for you to type in questions, and please feel free to type those questions in throughout the presentation. Of course, at the end, we'll have a question and answer time, and also Carlene's information, as well as mine, email, and things like that, will be provided at the end. So if you have additional questions and you don't think of them today, please feel free to respond or to reach out to us in the future. We'll be happy to answer those questions. So like I said, today's presentation is being brought to you guys by Carlene Mitchell. And Carlene, I will let you take it over from here.
All right, thanks very much, Cole. Good morning, everyone. And certainly if we have any technical difficulties, Cole, jump in and let me know as quick as possible, but we'll go ahead and get started. So new employee orientation and onboarding. This is a really topic that's very near and dear to my heart because unfortunately most businesses do not put a lot of emphasis on this topic, and it is such an important thing for organizations to consider developing and providing to their new employees because it really supports employee engagement and helps reduce turnover in the workplace. So it is really my goal to help your organizations consider ways to develop programs that you can help an employee become oriented to your organization, with their job, and bring them through a clear onboarding program to help increase their engagement and retain them and help them to be successful. So our objectives here today, well, let's see, my computer is gonna be a little slow moving, give me a moment, is first of all, I wanna talk about why you do new employee orientation and onboarding. And also, what is the difference between onboarding versus orientation? There is a distinct difference. We're going to go over some of the common problems that organizations have with their onboarding process, and also help you develop ways or find ways to develop an effective program. For example, what information do you present? How do you present this information, and who presents it to your new employees? I'm also going to provide you with a couple of tools to help you with your onboarding development process. So why do we do orientation and onboarding? So companies that have an onboarding program have been shown to have a better assimilation for their new employees into their company culture. So consider a new employee coming into your organization, what your organization is like, and then what they might have come from. It could be something markedly different than what they are coming to with your organization. So for example, maybe they came from a very structured environment where yours is more relaxed, or they had been with a very large organization, like my previous place of employment had about 200 employees, and here at APEI we only have 8 employees, or a centralized versus a decentralized system within your organization. It could be quite a change that needs to be taken into consideration so they understand how your organization operates and what the expectations might be there. Also, with onboarding and orientation programs, those good programs, they help increase the time to productivity levels for your new employees. They get in there, they get comfortable, and they get going faster. That leads to higher employee engagement. The statistics on employee disengagement are woefully bad. We're always looking for ways that we can have an employee engaged in their workplace, engaged in their job, and to be more productive. By having these orientation and onboarding programs, that increases, and ultimately that higher time to productivity level, the higher employee engagement reduces turnover. And this is so important for your organization. I mean, take a few moments to think about what it costs for your organization in time and money to recruit a new employee. You have to open a position, you advertise, you get management's time to review resumes and interview the applicants, the time to train the new employee and get them up to speed. You want to do that as infrequently as possible. And the more engaged our employees are, the less turnover we have and the less time and money you're spending on that new recruitment hire training process. Additionally, for new employees, they benefit from this process because when they come into your organization, it helps increase their comfort level with their new job. I mean, it can be nerve-wracking coming into a new position. They want to do a good job. And so by having that active engagement with the employee where expectations are clear and they understand what is expected of them and what the company culture is, it's going to help them become comfortable much more quickly. It also helps reinforce their decision to stay with the organization, because really as soon as people come into your organization, they start thinking ahead about what's going to come up next. So are they thinking they want to stay with the company, or are they already looking for an exit? I had taken a job one time that within 2 weeks of starting the job, I was thinking about leaving. I ended up staying in the position for a year because I was concerned about how it would look on my resume to have left a job so quickly, but I was already looking for the exit door because the disorganization within that particular job was really, really horrendous. So also, for a new employee, it enhances their performance. So the sooner an employee is productive, the sooner they're going to be comfortable and feel needed. What that ultimately leads to is it encourages commitment and engagement in the job. So not only do they want to stay with the company, but they want to do a good job for you. So they will take this information, this comfort level, this commitment, and they'll be committed to staying with you and doing the best job possible. The better people feel about the job they're doing, the more engaged they are. So we talk about orientation and we talk about onboarding, and these are really two different things. First of all, orientation is a subset of onboarding. It's just one small piece of the onboarding process. Often orientation is a one-day event, or it might be broken up over 2 days in smaller chunks, but it's usually a fairly time-limited presentation to your new employee or employees if there is a group. Orientation will focus much more on the organizational structure, what your organization's mission is, and the policies for the organization as a whole. Usually, and I highly recommend this, that orientation will include a review of the employee handbook. If your organization has a well-written handbook, often a lot of questions can be answered just simply in a review of that handbook. It's also, orientation is a great place to review payroll information, benefit information, and get all of the paperwork filed and completed for that individual's payroll, for their benefits, and any other new employee documentation that needs to be completed. And this is where you complete any other administrative tasks. So for example, making sure that they have keys and appropriate computer logins and other such information. In contrast, onboarding is an ongoing process. It's not just a 1 or 2 day event, but something that can go on for quite a long period of time. So for example, it can last for 3 to 18 months on average, depending on the complexity of the position. If you have a position that is lower level and more basic skills oriented, somebody might get into that job and they get the skills down quickly and they're off and running. But a more complex position can take even longer. If you have a position that depends upon a calendar cycle, for example, a quarterly or an annual process, it can take 1 or 2 years for someone to really get comfortable in their position. And I'll use my position as an example. APEI runs on a very annual individualized process. There's very specific set of steps that go into our insurance process throughout the year. And I've been with this organization now going on 2.5 years, and it really took me a good full 2 years of going through that annualized cycle before I really got comfortable with how things are work. And I still am learning, but my supervisors have always made themselves readily available for me to go to them and ask them questions and working with me through that process. That is all onboarding, is that continual conversation about understanding the position that the person is doing. So the onboarding program is also there to help cultivate long-term relationship building between the employee, their employers, and their coworkers. So one of the things really important to do is to think about who the employee is going to be working with regularly and what steps can you take to help foster a positive long-term relationship with that new employee and those other individuals. So onboarding also, it helps promote a better understanding of your organizational culture, mission, and goals. So instead of just this one-day presentation about what your organizational culture is and mission and goals, the onboarding process will continually reiterate what that culture is, what the mission is, and what those goals are to help the employee fully understand it. It's usually those are things that cannot be just covered in a single statement, but through ongoing communication with the employee. So onboarding also exists to help foster feelings of belonging. So again, that comfort level that an employee develops and in becoming quickly comfortable with the job and the duties that they have, they understand what their position is in their organization and how it affects the other positions in their agency and the organization as a whole. That's going to help foster feelings of belonging. And again, these are things that are communicated in that that ongoing onboarding process. Onboarding also helps reduce the time it takes the employee to hit the ground running. This regular communication of what their job is, how they do it, and what the expectations are. They're going to be off and running much faster as opposed to somebody who comes in, is sat at a desk, and is just expected to read manuals and procedure manuals to learn their job. So this statement here at the bottom of the slide, sustainable engagement is an experience, not an event. So in order to sustain engagements with your employees, this communication has to start from the beginning of their employment and continue on. And again, dependent upon the degree of complexity of the position, it might require more focused communication and for a longer period of time. So there are some real common problems that occur with the onboarding and very specifically the orientation process. Number one that I come across is that it is boring. I've seen some orientations in particular where the employees are just spoken to for a few hours. There's not a lot of real engagement. The employer is presenting information without asking any questions of the employees. One of the things I encourage is in that orientation process is to ask the employee questions about their previous experiences in other workplace, how that contrasts with what is expected in the new workplace. And it might bring about a great opportunity to provide information that is much needed. And likewise, in doing so, in engaging the employees and encouraging them to participate in the onboarding and orientation program, it keeps it much more interesting, not so boring. Also, information overload. It is really easy to sit down and want to pile on a whole handbook full of information with an employee within just a couple of hours of time. And often on a first day of work, or even in those first few days of work, there's a lot to think about. They're probably already a little nervous, a little overwhelmed, and by dumping too much on them at once, they don't digest that information. So deliver the information in digestible chunks. Think about, for example, if you go over the benefits information, how can you take that information and break it down in a smaller way, a more understandable way, perhaps introduce them to the staff that work with those benefits, and how can you take that information and make it more interesting so they retain it more easily. Think about spreading the onboarding training out amongst a few people. If you're the only person who is presenting this information, they might get a little tired of hearing you talk. So again, think about how you can incorporate other people into that process, that training, and in order to help break the monotony of the orientation and onboarding presentation. Another problem with onboarding is that it simply doesn't exist. Employees are left to sink or swim. They don't get any real information or training. There's no greetings or introductions. And I had referenced a position I had previously within a couple of weeks, I was pretty much ready to leave. This really happened to me. I was set down at a desk. I was given like a 3-inch thick binder full of statutes, regulations, and policies, and said, here, read this. I didn't get introduced to other people in my department, in the organization, and I was just kind of left to sink or swim. So it's really important to think about what information do you need to provide, what training needs to happen, and who these people will interact with, and making those introductions. Another issue that occurs is a failure to prepare. Somebody walks into their new work and they don't have a workplace all set up. Maybe the other employees, previous employees' stuff is still all over the desk. Their computer's not ready to go. They have to wait a few days before they can even get logged into their computer. There's no plan in place for orientation, for training, for introductions. So the employee, this new employee, is going to be looking around and see this disorganization, and they're going to think, boy, this place is really poorly run. So that first impression is incredibly important. Don't let this happen to your new employee. It just happens all too often, where we have a hiring manager saying to an employee, are you okay to start Monday? By the way, I'm not telling anyone you're coming, so you won't have anything ready for you. You don't even have a desk yet. You can wing it, right? And it's oversimplified, but it often does happen. But the fact is about 22% of staff turnovers occur in the first 45 days of employment. This is huge. Again, the time and expense that you have just made to recruit this employee, and here they are walking out the door within a month and a half, and you have to start all over again. That's extremely detrimental to your organization. You only have one chance to make a first impression. Think ahead, plan, and think about the way that your organization appears to this employee. I mean, to be fair, the employee has to think a lot about the first impression they're making on you, but the employer, you have an obligation as well, because it's just as important as the impression that employee makes. So how do you develop an onboarding program? This isn't overly complex. It literally might just take sitting down with a whiteboard or a pad and paper and start making some notes. Start with who's going to be involved. Human resources staff is always the logical choice, but don't leave it up to just human resources to develop your onboarding program. You need to involve managers who, in particular, managers who are involved with this incoming employee and in their direct chain of management. The employee needs to know who their managers are. And again, you start explaining what the expectations are of those managers for that employee. The other people that are really important to involve is senior leadership. Your senior leadership needs to be visible, and there are some really important messages that senior leadership can pass down to your new employees that makes it really clear, again, what the expectations are, especially in for example, the company culture. So we'll use as an example, say, discrimination and harassment. These types of policies are the type that really need to be communicated from the top down. Senior management is the ideal people to say to your new employees, our organization has a zero tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment. And if you experience discrimination and harassment in our workplace, we want to hear about it, and we want the opportunity to correct that. Those are the ideal people to communicate that message to new employees, so the new employees know that this comes from the top. Also think about key employees that will be involved with this new employee and how you can incorporate them in the onboarding program so that these employees can see, again, how their new position fits into the organization as a whole. The other thing you want to think about in developing your onboarding program is, what will the new employees' takeaways be? How are they going to feel about their new job? Do they understand what their role is in their work team or their department, or again in the company as a whole? And what perceptions will they have of the organization after the orientation and throughout the onboarding process? Are they going to leave with a positive impression of the company and the part that they play? Are they just going to be really confused and feel that the organization is disorganized, or that their position really isn't that valuable? Also think about, what is the employee going to get from this onboarding and orientation process? Is it going to make it easy for them to get information they need? So if you don't provide all the information they need right there in that orientation, is the employee at least going to have an idea where they can find the information or who they might ask to get that information? Is their onboarding program going to help ensure their success? Are they going to get the tools and resources that they need to succeed? And is your message to them clear? Do they really understand the expectations for their position, where they fit in the organization, and your company culture and ethics? So what's the plan? I love this illustration because it's literally what I think you could use to develop your onboarding program. It's a little bit simplified, but literally to sit down and start illustrating, drawing out what your orientation and onboarding plan can look like. You start here. What happens next? Who do they need to speak to? Where do they need to go? What are all the places that they need to visit to help them understand where they fit in the organization? All of the steps that need to happen and things that really should be covered. Draw it out. It'll help you visualize what your onboarding program will be. So when do you start onboarding? It can actually start before the employee does. Here are some things that you can consider doing before they even have their first day of work. For example, provide the new hire with a new employee handbook. So the employee, if you provide them with a handbook right prior to their starting employment, think about it. They're about to start a new job. They're probably pretty excited and pumped up, and they can get the handbook out and start reading through it. It might prompt some good questions from them so that when they come in, they're prepared to ask those questions of you on their first or in their first few days. Once they get started, if a day or two into their new job, you hand them an employee handbook, they're probably going to be pretty wrapped up in starting their job and getting going and wanting to do a good job. So they may not pay as much attention to that handbook. So see if you can get it to them ahead of time. If you have it, provide a copy of the mission statement of the organization, your vision, your values of the organization. Often these are in the employee handbook, but if they're separate, see if you can get them for them too. Or create a separate document that you can provide to the employee that you might provide to them, for example, with their offer letter. Be sure that they get a copy of their job description ahead of time. Just like the employee handbook, it allows them the opportunity to look over their job duties and come to you and be able to ask questions early on about anything that they are confused about or might have concerns about. Also, insurance information is a great thing, benefit information, to provide them ahead of time so they have time to think about what benefits they want. Do they need to apply for your organization's health insurance plan? Or maybe they have a spouse that already has insurance. Do they want dual coverage? It'll allow them to think ahead about what they need. Their dress code. You don't want that poor person walking into the office on the first day of work where everybody else is in jeans and casual clothes and they walk in a three-piece suit, or vice versa. So making sure that they know what to expect as far as the dress code goes, so there's no unneeded embarrassment. Information about where they can park, who they can report to. My previous job, on a few occasions, I had somebody come in and they're standing there in the hallway sort of looking around because nobody had taken the time to tell them, oh, when you come in, go here and go to office number such and such in order to begin your day. So help them know where to go to get their day started on their first day. Think about any additional information that you can provide to the employee that'll help them get to know the organization. Do they know where your organizational website is, that they can go out and take a look at it? Do you have newsletters? What is anything else that you can provide to the employee that will help them get excited and be ready to go on their first day? So some of the ways that you could provide this information to the employee before they start: if they're going to come in and sign an offer letter for their job, think about having a packet ready to go to hand to them on their first day. I have seen before where businesses also include in there a little trinket like a company branded flashlight or a pen or something of that sort, depending on what you have at your organization. You can also mail something to them. Imagine how nice it would be to get a nice little packet in the mail saying, hey, we're really excited that you're joining us. Here's some information to help you get started. Call us if you have any questions. Otherwise, we will be excited to see you at this time on this date at this location to start your new job. Welcome aboard. So anything that you can think of to personalize that experience and make that individual excited about joining you. So before the new hire arrives, here's a number of things that you want to think about having ready to go. So first of all, have a plan ready for their orientation and onboarding. Make sure you schedule time for the various introductions, the paperwork, and training. I'm a real fan of setting up those schedules because if you try to wing it, all too often important pieces of that process, they'll just be missed or overlooked because you start falling into the trap of, oh, well, we don't have time. So make sure you set up a schedule and have some type of plan ready to go. Take a few moments to remind everybody that's going to be involved in the orientation and onboarding process of what their involvement is and what it is they are to present. And likewise, have some type of backup plan. What are you going to do if someone is out sick or otherwise unavailable? Who's going to cover? So with your plan, consider a certain amount of flexibility and where you might be able to fill in the gaps if someone is not available. Prepare the employee's initial work assignments. Think about a new person coming in and how valuable it would be to them on their first day of work if you set up some basic tasks for them, again, depending upon the complexity of the job, that they can go ahead and start doing. Rather than coming in and spending their entire first day of work doing paperwork and hearing about policies and training, can you set aside some time for them to do some actual work? And they start to feel like, yes, I have value, I belong, and that helps foster that excitement. So any type of project, it helps foster those feelings of usefulness and belonging. And again, that all important engagement that you want to start having your employee feel. Make sure everything is ready to go. I can't stress this enough. Ensure the employee's workspace, their desk, if their work area, their locker is ready to go, that they have their little space that they'll come to. And again, that that gives that feeling of belonging. Again, I remember when I came to APEI, I had my own office. It was set up, everything tidy and clean, and I was able to come in and kind of set myself up. I was invited to bring my own artwork in to hang on my office walls, and it just really made me excited about being here. So if the new employee is going to cross-train with a departing employee, so you have some overlap between the person who has been doing this job and the new person coming in, think ahead of time about talking to that departing employee about making space for the incoming employee. I heard a story once about a new employee coming into an organization. There was a couple of weeks of overlap with the departing employee. And after a week and a half, the new employee asked somebody else, so where is my workspace? Where's my desk going to be? And it was that this new employee was taking over for the departing employee, but the departing employee still had all of their pictures and tchotchkes and stuff all over the desk. So this new employee kind of came in feeling like they didn't have their own space for quite a long time. So encourage that new employee to start moving out and making that new space for the new employee coming in. Obviously, to have their computer login ready to go, any keys that they'll need, badges, and so forth. Anything else that they will need on a day-to-day basis. Have those things ready to go. It really makes your organization look good and organized if it's all set and ready. So let's talk about the various stages of onboarding. The first stage is that overview or that general orientation that you do with the employee. Again, this might be a few hours, it might be a day, or broken up over a couple of different days, but there's a number of things that you'll complete with that new employee. First of all, those administrative tasks, all that new hire paperwork, I-9s, W-4s, direct deposit, organizational new hire paperwork, anything that you require them to sign off right away, you'll take care of those tasks. Those are usually the things you do right away. Also, this is the time, again, that you take the time to go over your compensation and benefits for the employee. I mean, that's why we work, right? Is we need our paychecks, we look forward to our benefits because that supports our lives outside of work. So what are your payroll procedures? When can an individual expect to get their first paycheck? What are your pay dates? What is their pay and their pay grades? So go over that information so that it gives them right up front the opportunity to ask questions. What are your insurance and benefit programs that you have in your organization? Make sure that you provide them with a good explanation of what your health insurance covers, what deductibles are, what co-pays might be, so they can start thinking about what they want. And also, very importantly, any retirement plan information, because you really are, as an employer, obligated to make sure employees are very, very clear on what opportunities they have to participate in a retirement plan. Any type of educational assistance that you might offer. Again, this can help really encourage engagement in an organization. If you have those benefits and people know about them, they may take the opportunity to use them. And it not only benefits them, but it can benefit your organization. So make sure they know about those. Attendance policies, these are huge. Make sure people know what holidays your organization observes. It might, again, be slightly different than the previous workplace that they were in. I know in Southeast Alaska, for instance, there's communities that rather than celebrating or observing Martin Luther King Day, they observe Elizabeth Peradovich Day instead. So making sure those types of things are clear to them. What are their paid time off benefits? Do they earn personal leave, sick leave? How does that work? How do they use it? What are your policies in regards to use? And when can they expect leave accruals, for example, to increase? What are your policies for reporting absences and tardiness? This is an area that can cause a lot of confusion for employees. Be specific. If you require an employee to call in, make sure they know how far ahead of time they should be calling in and who they should be contacting. What form of communication is acceptable? Must it be a phone call? Is an email okay? Would you accept a text message? What is acceptable? Be clear about what your policy is in regard to tardiness. Some organizations can allow a little more flexibility with tardiness, where others, some positions, really are dependent upon the timeliness of employees because it can have an impact on the program as a whole. Jury duty. How does an employee let you know if they've been selected for jury duty? And likewise, if they might be in need of leave under the Family Medical Leave Act or the Alaska Family Leave Act, then how do they request that leave, and what is your organizational policies in regards to those leave benefits? In general, go over your organizational policies, your ethics. These are so important because from the get-go, you want to be really clear about what your organizational policies are and your ethics are with the organization. The sooner you can make that clear to employees, if you begin having any issues with the employee down the road, then you can easily, it's going to be much more easy to go back to the employee and say, hey, we observed an issue. On your first few days of work, we reviewed these policies, these ethics, these requirements, and here's the documentation showing that we did so. Here is the issue that we are having. We need to reiterate this. What is your understanding? What might you be misunderstanding? It really helps set your organization up to address issues with an employee down the road if you make these policies, these ethics, and these expectations and requirements clear from the get-go. Make sure people are aware of your organizational bulletin board. That's where you have your employment posters and other notices to employees, whether or not they're allowed to post information on those bulletin boards. Any company newsletters where they can see those and review and perhaps comment on them. Make sure employees are clear on what your organizational complaint and grievance procedures are. You want to be upfront with this. Again, I talked about senior leadership in your organization, speaking about what the organizational policies are on things such as discrimination, harassment. Well, if anybody experiences that, where do they make a complaint? What are the grievance procedures? So by being open and transparent, it helps develop trust, and it fosters a feeling of the employees being able to address these concerns as they come up, rather than feeling like it might cause a problem if they do, or if they ask how to make a complaint or a grievance. Make sure people are clear on your email and internet policies. Also, a big one these days is social media policies. Be really, really clear, because certainly these are areas that can cause a lot of problems for your organization. And then again, your organizational mission, what your goals and what your values are. Try to identify what those are as a whole and make sure people know what they are, because it really ties into the big picture of your organization. Everything else really trickles down from your organizational mission, goals, and values. The second step of onboarding is job-specific orientation. So consider doing a tour of the work area with this new employee. Usually, of course, here this is where a manager would be providing this tour to the employee. Make sure you take the time to orient the employee to the areas where they'll work and to introducing them to the other people that they will work with. Be sure that you identify for them where break areas are, restrooms, if they smoke, where they are allowed to smoke. Just don't take for granted that employees know these basic things. Go back and think about what your first day of work was like, and what questions did you have? What did you want to know? Take some time to do a nice introduction with their work team. Describe what the role is of the different staff and how it ties into this new employee's job so they understand how that they work together. See if you can find time for you to arrange for a time for the employee to meet with other key employees to do training and to build an understanding of the processes within the team or within their department and in the company as a whole. Again, that understanding of where they fit into the big picture will help them be more engaged and understanding of how their job impacts others. Consider having a meet and greet for the team. It could be coffee or lunch, a short break, some type of short team building and a social gathering. It'll allow a more relaxed environment for employees to talk in a non-work situation and allow them to get allow the new employee to get to know the others better. Take some time then too, of course, to introduce the new employee to their work duties, but start small. Don't overwhelm the employee. One of the things I've observed before is you have a very well-meaning long-term employee who is doing training and orienting a new employee to their duties, and they have been there so long and they know so much that they just want to really share how knowledgeable they are. This is not the time to show off everything that you've ever learned. Rather, take the time to think back again to how much the employee will be able to digest in the first few days, and start small. And as you work with them, you will probably catch on to how well they're catching on and how much information that they can handle. Look at preparing a workflow of key processes. This is really huge. If you can develop key processes for the employee to follow, you can go over them the first couple of times, have them completing the task following these key processes, and then you can set them free. And they have this list of processes of instructions on completing some of their key tasks, and it helps them develop some autonomy that they will feel comfortable and confident sooner if they can do stuff by themselves. Take some time again too to think about what are some of the first tasks that this employee can do, and giving them some very specific tasks that they complete that are meaningful and beneficial, and again will help foster that sense of belonging in their workplace. The step 3 of onboarding is the part that takes a lot of time. This is the follow-up. This is the part that can take 3 to 18 months. Now, obviously, this is not something that you are doing continually each and every day, but rather it is the practice of taking the time periodically to go to the employee and follow up with them on how they're doing. Engage them, engage that new employee. Take the time to go to them and say, how are things going? Is everything okay? Is there anything we can do for you? Think about sponsoring get-togethers with the team. Again, coffee, lunch, just a short break where you can kind of talk about how things are going. Don't forget about this new employee, and don't assume that if you've not heard from them that everything is okay. Sometimes people are afraid to speak up and ask questions. Sometimes it really helps if you can go to them and check in on them. Maintain an open door policy. This is something, again, you can state from the get-go, but really continue to encourage and reiterate to the employee, is that you have an open door and invite the employee to visit their manager whenever they have a question. So remind them, you want them to be successful. If that manager is not always available, identify other key staff the employee can go to if they have questions or if they need additional help. Give them the tools and the resources that they need to be successful. Feedback. This isn't just your feedback to the employee. This is feedback from the employee. Don't be afraid to ask for feedback from the employee. If you do an orientation, provide them with an evaluation form. Sometimes it kind of stings a little bit to get some negative comments, but if somebody provides you with feedback that says, oh, that orientation was really boring, it should be a message to you that you maybe need to look at ways to make it a little more interesting and more engaging. So take the time to ask employees for their feedback on your orientation and onboarding program. The next bit of way to get and receive feedback is through supervision meetings, either daily, weekly, or monthly, depending upon how long the employee's been there. So let's talk about supervision meetings in a little more detail. This is just a tool. It's something that I used in a previous workplace, and when used properly, it had a lot of success. There's a lot of organizations that are actually moving away from, for example, annual performance evaluations, and instead they're finding a system of regular feedback to the employee. So rather than once a year them hearing about whether or not they're doing a good job, they're getting this feedback on a really regular basis. It takes a little bit of time, but it can really help foster success with the employee and help prevent long-term issues from developing with the employee. So in this particular model, it's recommended that you start with some type of recognition of the employee. Make sure that that recognition is meaningful and meaningful praise. Don't just come up with any old thing. Take the time to look at their job performance and let them know what you think they are doing well and where they have been successful. Also then, take some time to clarify what your expectations are for the employee. Again, by reiterating what expectations are, it will help reinforce them. Define what your expectations are for their job performance, and make sure you provide them with any knowledge they need, their skills, training, and tools in order to meet those expectations. Take some time to talk about any issues or concerns. I can't tell you how often it is that I speak to our members and they are telling me about an employee issue that has been long-standing, where an issue or a concern was not addressed timely. By having set regular meetings with your employees, you can take the time to clearly discuss any issues or concerns you have with them, hopefully before they have spun out of control. When you're talking about issues or concerns with an employee, one of the things that you'll have to keep in mind, or a manager will need to keep in mind, is whether the individual is willing and able to do their job. If they're not able, what do they need in order to be able? If they're not willing, is it because they have some issue with the job, they just don't want to do it, they're disengaged? How do you get them engaged? How do you address that? So those are things that would need to be addressed at that time. Take the time to ask the employee to identify any issues or concerns they have with the job. Now, this is a listening technique, and this is super important. When you have these meetings, it's one thing for you to be speaking to the employee and providing them recommendations or recognition, expectations, or identifying issues and concerns, but it's not going to mean a lot to them if they don't feel like they are being heard. And so listening is a real art, and it is incredibly beneficial thing for managers to learn. And one of the things that you can do to show an employee that you are listening is when you ask the employee to identify any issues and concerns that they have, is take the time to reflect back to them what you have heard. Name what you identified they're feeling to be, and then restate what the problem is. That's saying to them, I hear what you have just said to me, and you're more likely to have good open communication with the employee if you take that time to listen and show them that you have listened. And that's how you do it, by reflecting and restating the problem. Develop a plan. If you have talked about training or skills that they need to develop, or issues or concerns that need to be addressed, what is the plan for providing your clear plans for expectations and addressing those concerns and showing that those expectations are being met? Or if not, how do you go about addressing this again with the employee? Take the time to set a date and a time for the next supervision meeting so you can go over those things again. And importantly, document. Document, document, document. Take notes about the items that were discussed, and then you have the supervisor sign that document and have the employees sign it as well. Just like going over your policies and by setting expectations, when you have these meetings and you would make your expectations clear, you address issues and concerns, and the employee addresses any issues or concerns. If going down the road you continue to have problems, by having this documentation, you have already begun to set yourself up to be able to address this issue more easily if the employment relationship begins to fail. This is a really great way to already have documentation in place. Again, it's all too often I hear about that employers have had a problem with an employee. Maybe they've talked to the employee, but they have not written anything down. And it makes it really hard to defend when you terminate the employee and if there's any type of grievance or lawsuit that follows. So document, document, document. I have a sample form that I developed that I can provide to you for supervision meetings. You could model it to fit your organization. But if you're interested in that form, you can email me after the presentation and I'd be happy to provide it. A few more things to consider with your onboarding program. Block off time for the employees. Make sure you specifically set time to work with the employees on their orientation and their ongoing onboarding process. If you don't set the time, you likely will not make the time. You'll develop every excuse in your head to skip over doing those very important steps, those meetings, that communication, and that training if you don't set the time. Think about identifying a sponsor or a buddy for the employee who can back up this supervisor and help them to learn their job and to be more comfortable. This can be just about anybody on the work team. You go through and consider who might be the best. And often it is a supervisor's gut instinct to go to the most senior, most experienced employee to have them be the sponsor or buddy. But don't overlook a newer employee. A newer employee might benefit from having this role of this sponsor, because first of all, they're probably still learning their job, and one of the best ways to learn a job is by teaching it to somebody else. And it also helped them gain some confidence. The other benefit of using a newer employee is they probably remember better what it's like to be new, how nervous they were, things they were confused about and didn't understand, and it might help them that new employee to relate better to this person who is newer rather than the employee who's been working for your organization for 20 years. So find someone who can help back up that supervisor, go-to person that can help this new employee out. Prepare and state expectations. By now you're probably getting sick of me saying state expectations, make your expectations clear, but I can't say it enough. Your communications must be clear. The sooner you can state what your expectations are for the employee from the get-go, by going over their employee handbook, by reviewing the employee's job description and their specific duties, those attendance and tardiness policies, making sure you are very, very clear on those things. The easier you'll be able to address issues in the future, but also the less likely you are going to have problems with the employee not meeting those expectations. And document. Document the training that you have provided to this employee. What did you go over? Did you go over your handbook? Did you go over your policies? Are there specific policies that you should go over in more detail and have them sign off and put in their personnel file? So make sure that you document all of the various things that you went over and include that documentation in the employee's file. So be really clear. Let me just give a real quick example. With expectations, when you are speaking to the employee and say discussing when they should be at work every day, rather than saying, oh, your work time is about 8 o'clock, make sure you say work time starts at 8 o'clock. We require that you are here timely, but get here early enough so you can take care of any personal business before we begin the workday at 8 a.m. So be really, really clear. So I mentioned the sample forms that I have available. The supervision form was one I already mentioned, but I also have an onboarding checklist. Again, it's a template. You could take it and format it to fit your organization better. So if you're interested in those forms, go ahead and just send me an email after the presentation, and I'll get you copies of those. You can use them any way you want. They're free, and you can use them however you like, and change them up to fit your needs. So that is my presentation on onboarding and orientation. I appreciate all of you who have taken the time to attend. I hope you found the information useful. I just really like to reiterate too that APEI is here to help. If you have any questions, as Cole mentioned, my area of expertise is HR. I'm really happy to try and help you with any questions that you may have. I get a lot of emails and phone calls from members. Any topic I'm really happy to help with. Cole, also any of our staff in regards to workers' compensation or any potential claims, please let us know. We really want to help you guys out. So my contact information is there, and certainly Cole's, if you contact him, either one of us, if we don't have an answer, we can help you find the member of our staff that can help you out. So thank you again for your attendance.